Hi, this is Leroy Ford, and welcome back to part two of Solomon's wisdom and Solomon's sins. Okay, now, so let me break this down to you. So Solomon committed two very grave sins. Well, the second sin was worse than the first sin, much, much worse. So let me just take you through the two sins that he committed. The first sin that he committed was by having 1,000 wives. God punishes King Solomon because he took 1,000 wives. And the reason why he did that was because he was hoping to have 1,000 sons, which I'll get into in a bit. So King Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Concubines is kind of like the ancient term for your side chick, right? The wives were described as foreign princesses. One was Pharaoh's daughter, Pharaoh of Egypt. But he also had wives of Moab, Ammon, Edom. If you're experienced and educated in biblical history, Moab are the Chinese, Edom are the Caucasians, Ammon are the Japanese, and so on. The Ammonites are Japanese, Moabites are the Chinese, Edomites are the Caucasians, Ishmaelites are the Arabs. The Israelites are the Negroes who are in America and the UK. And the Hamites are Africans. So the Hamites look similar to Negroes, but then they're very different people. The Israelites are God's chosen people. The Hamites are like all the other nations. They're called Gentiles, of which there are approximately 18 nations. So just getting back to Solomon and his many wives. He's married to Pharaoh's daughter. That was largely cemented as a political alliance with Egypt. That was the purpose of getting married to Pharaoh's daughter. And a lot of nations still do that today. You'll see, well, not so much today, but certainly 50 to 100 years ago, you'd see kings marrying the daughters of the neighboring country to maintain peace between the nations, to bring them together. Okay, so let's get back to his sins. So now the reason why it was a sin for him, it wasn't so much that it was a sin for him to have 1,000 wives. It was the fact that they were foreign wives. They weren't Israelites. And Solomon was a Jew. And there's a difference between Jews and Israelites. The Jews, there are 12 tribes of Israel, right? The Israelites, there are 12 tribes. Only 2 of them are Jews. That's the tribe of Judah, which is where you get the name, which is where you get the term Jew from. The tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Both those 2 tribes are Jews. All the other 10 tribes are simply Israelites. They're not Jews. Now, Solomon was of the tribe of Judah, which made him a Jew. So the laws were particularly sensitive for the Jews. The Jews were really, really supposed to keep the laws. They were essentially the representatives. They were the cream of the crop. They were meant to be a light to the other Israelites, the other 10 tribes, and the 12 tribes are a light to the nations. So if Judah messes up and doesn't keep the laws, then there's very little hope for anybody else. They were God's premier chosen. I mean, the nation of Israel is God's chosen people, the 12 tribes, but Judah is his chosen. Okay, so now, because he's a king, he has the pick of the litter, right? He can choose a wife from anywhere. He's the king of the most powerful nation on earth, Israel. But Israel was forbidden to intermarry with particularly 7 nations. They were Hamite nations. They were the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, definitely not the Canaanites. And there's various others. The reason why God commanded Israel not to take a wife of the foreign nations, but to take a wife of the seed of thy father. The reason for that is because these foreign nations, the Bible calls these other nations the heathen Gentiles. They are not God's people. They're into idolatry, they're into paganism, they're into polytheism, believing in multiple gods. So God says, do not take a wife of these women of these nations, because they lead you away from me. That was the reason for the law. And that law is in Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 6. And also Deuteronomy 17, chapter 17, verse 17. The king must not take many wives for himself, because they will lead him away from the Lord. And 1 Kings 11, 1 through 4. But King Solomon loved many strange women. King Solomon had wives from every country. He had more Chinese wives, Indian wives, Caucasian wives, African wives. He had wives from all over the world. Together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Zidonians, and the Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come into you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, and was the heart of David his father. So Solomon had 1,000 wives, and the reason why he had 1,000 wives is because he wanted 1,000 sons. You see, it wasn't because he was lustful. It wasn't similar. I mean, he was to a certain degree, but he kind of had a noble cause. His reasoning for wanting 1,000 sons was because he wanted to expand the nation of Israel all over the world. So he was doing it in glory of his God, to expand his nation. But the way he went about it was very typically man-like, right? It was typically human, the way a normal guy would go about doing it. He should have just trusted in the Lord and, had a normal family and a normal amount of children, and that would, the flow of the tide, the water would flow in the right direction naturally. But he was, he was very ambitious. So and here's how we know the reasoning why he wanted 1,000 sons, which is in the in a book called the Kebra Nagast, which is part of the Ethiopian Bible. Now, if you know anything about King Solomon, if you've studied deep, not surface level studying, but deep studying of King Solomon, you'll know that King Solomon's first son was to the Ethiopian queen called the Queen of Sheba, and his son was Menelik. So Menelik was basically half Israelite, half Ethiopian. His mother was Ethiopian, his father an Israelite, King Solomon. That was Solomon's first son. So and there was actually a second kingdom of Israel set up in Ethiopia. There was also another one in Italy, where he had a secret son that, well, I think it's just largely been hidden from history, to be honest. But he had a secret son in Italy because he wanted to create a third kingdom in Italy. And that son was called Adrami, Adrami. And if you Google that and you research it, very little information is going to come up. But you have to study this document, this Ethiopian document called the Kebra Nagast. So let's get back to the passage in the Kebra Nagast. This is how we know the reasoning why King Solomon wanted 1,000 sons. Chapter 34, or segment 34. I don't think it's chapters. Segment 34 in the Kebra Nagast. How the young man arrived in his mother's country. This is Queen of Sheba, Ethiopia. The young man is the prince Menelik, King Solomon's very firstborn son. And it states, it happened to Solomon even as Paul stateth, saying, God hath made foolishness the wisdom of this world. For Solomon had made a plan in his wisdom and said, by 1,000 women I shall beget 1,000 men children, and I shall inherit the countries of the enemy, and I will overthrow their idols. But God only gave him 3 children. His eldest son was the king of Ethiopia, the son of the queen of Ethiopia, and was the firstborn of whom God spoke prophetically. God sware unto David in righteousness, and repented not. Of the fruit of thy body will I make to sit upon thy throne. Now, that was Solomon's first sin, having 1,000 wives. His first sin led to his second sin, and the second sin was infinitely worse than the first sin. And this second sin actually led to the downfall of Israel. It led to the split of his kingdom. And his sin was idolatry and worshipping other gods, which is the very first commandment: thou shalt not have any other gods before me. King Solomon threw it all away for the lust of a woman. He risked his whole kingdom and all of Israel for one woman, a non-Israelite woman. King Solomon desired a Shunammite woman who was a polytheist, a believer in idols and other gods. But her pagan priest said to Solomon, yes, you can only have her only if you make a sacrifice to our god Moloch. Solomon does, and the Most High's Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, immediately leaves Solomon's body, as well as his wisdom. He's immediately weakened, and he then goes on to build temples to these pagan gods. This was Solomon's second and greatest sin. And I just asked myself, how could Solomon, with all his wisdom, have made such an unbelievably bad mistake? You know, so I just can't, I can't, you know, rectify this in my mind. If he's so wise, how could you have made such a mistake? So I automatically come to the conclusion that there was some kind of demonic intervention. Now, if you've read any of King Solomon's other books, his personally written books, there's one book called The Testament of Solomon, where it talks about how he has a ring, and with this ring, he manages to control 72 demons. And in fact, the book says it's those 72 demons that build the very first temple. But that's a video for another day. I'm going to leave that to the side. So I'm just thinking, possibly for him to have made such a cataclysmic error, that maybe it was possibly demon intervention. I don't know, like he was, possessed or something. But actually, I think there might be a much simpler reason, much simpler answer, and that is simply the word lust. A lot of great men have fallen by that simple word. Many great men have thrown away their kingdoms, their empires, their fortune, that they've spent their entire lives building up, even their marriages, only to risk it and throw it all away for a fleeting moment of temptation. You see it every day in the news, in the newspapers and on TV, these great celebrities just, in business, CEOs throwing it all away because, they've getting divorced because they've found themselves wandering. So, and you can throw everything, you can lose everything in an instant because of one moment of weakness. Hence, this is where we get the term Greek tragedy from, because the lust of a woman led to the Trojan War, which is in the book of Iliad, the Iliad. The Trojan War between the Greeks, with Achilles, which is what led to the fall of the kingdom of Troy. The lust of a woman, one woman, the beauty of a woman. This also is what led to the split of the nation of Israel into two separate nations. Solomon's sin of idolatry and worshipping these other gods, specifically Moloch, which is the bull god, following these other gods and adultery with foreign women, this led to the splitting of Israel, the splitting of the kingdom of Israel, all because Solomon bowed down and sacrificed to Moloch and other gods. There were a few other gods. There were 3 or 4 of them, which he was bound down to. Turning his back on the one most high God and praying to these lesser gods. And this is the very reason why the Most High God warned the Israelites not to mix with foreign women. This is in Deuteronomy 7, verse 1 through 6. It's because they will lead you away from the one true God, and you'll end up following their gods. You know, the Hindu gods, the pagan gods, the Scandinavian gods, all these other gods, the Hamite gods, the African gods. So there's very practical reasons for these commandments. The Most High God doesn't give frivolous reasons. He says, do this, and there's a reason why you need to do that. So Solomon burned incense and he sacrificed to these gods. There were 4 of them: Moloch, Astaroth, Milcom, and Chemosh. And this is all explained in 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 4 through 8. For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. So approximately 1,000 years before Jesus, Israel was split in 2. There was the kingdom which became the southern kingdom, which is called the kingdom of Judah, which are 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and the northern kingdom, which are the 10 tribes, who then subsequently became called the 10 lost tribes, also known as the lost sheep. This is the reason why Jesus came the first time. His first coming was to regather the lost sheep of Israel, who had been scattered after the Assyrian captivity. They'd been scattered to the 4 winds, mainly to Asia, Persia, the Far East, parts of Africa, and even as far as North America, such as the Native Americans. But I don't think Christ went to North America, but he certainly went to Asia to regather the lost sheep there. To regather means to remind them who they started it. This is over a long period of time. This is over, after the Assyrian captivity, it was approximately about 1,000 years they'd been lost. They'd been lost for about 1,000 years. So over that 1,000 years, they'd lost their identity. They had assimilated into other cultures, such as Buddhism. They'd started getting into Buddhism, certainly in Japan, which is where some of the lost tribes went. Well, didn't go there. They drifted there over time. Japan, they ended up in Buddhism, and certainly in India, which is why Christ sent Thomas to India, which it's also where Thomas died. He was killed by the Indian priests. But again, that's another story for another day. The point is, Christ came to regather, which is why he went missing for 18 years, from the age of 12 to 30. It's called Jesus's missing years. He was in Asia, mainly spent a great number, approximately 8 to 10 years in India, but he went to Tibet, he went to China, he went to Persia, Iran, and various other places. Just research Jesus's missing 18 years. That's why he came the first time, and he shed his blood for Israel. And I've said this a few times, he didn't die for Israel. He didn't die on the cross. He survived the cross. He wasn't on the cross very long. He was brought down. He was healed by Joseph of Arimathea, and he fled back to India. He actually fled to Kashmir, which is where he died, aged 120. Again, that's a video for another day. That's a huge video. I mean, that's probably going to be like a 5 or 6 part video, because so much to explain in terms of that. But essentially, that was why he came. Christ, why he came the first time. So what I'm saying, so that's the story of Solomon's wisdom and his sins. So I'm trying to keep this video short. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment below. Let me know what your thoughts are on Solomon's rise and his fall. Let me know what you think, about his wisdom and why you think he threw it all away. Also, click the like button if you enjoyed this video. I'd really appreciate it. And subscribe to the channel if you like this sort of content. This is Leroy Ford. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.